Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Living in the Good Space. I am the producer and host, Annette Johnson, the Fly Coach. And this podcast is a platform that I use to have conversations about how we can thrive wherever we are in life. I talk to experts, authors, medical professionals, therapists, artists, people from all over the world who are using their gifts to not only be a light and make a difference in their own light, but to do so for others as well. And so I'm a big fan of my guest today. I was gifted all three of her books. A good friend of mine knew that I wanted to take a deeper dive into the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he bought all three of Mary Winter's books for me. And I was so excited when I was able to have an opportunity to have her on as a guest. So I'm a huge fan of her work. She is the president and founder of the Winters Group, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm. She is an award-winning consultant and best-selling author of the book Black Fatigue, which is going to be the focus of our conversation today. But her other books include We Can't Talk About That at Work and Inclusive Conversations. And I kid you not, I have all three on my desk, and I am in and out of all three of those books as a resource with the work that I do in that space. So without further ado, I want to welcome a very special guest to Living in the Good Space, Mary Frances Winters.
Thank you so
Hello.
much.
Hello,
Hello.
hello. I am
Hello.
so excited to have you as a guest. Ever since your assistant confirmed you, I've been working on this interview, and I'm normally not scripted. I like to have just a very kind of casual conversation, but the work that you're doing in this space, I wanted to make sure I get as many nuggets and as much perspective as I can for the listeners. So thank you so much for joining me to have this conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me. Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So I cannot move forward. We're taping this show the day after the George Floyd verdict. So I can't move forward without us taking a pause on that verdict. And I'd love to get your perspective. I was relieved. I have to be honest. I did not follow the trial because I was nervous that it was not going to end the way that it did. And I didn't know how to prepare for that emotionally or mentally.
Right.
And so I said, let me not watch and just pray that this ends the way that it should end. What was your feelings and thoughts about the verdict yesterday?
It's like being in this dual world, still, that James Baldwin and others, talked about this, the double consciousness. And it's really like, on the one hand, you feel, wow, finally some measure of justice. And I don't even know if I call it justice. It's accountability. So we have accountability, but justice, I don't know. This one case is not going to give us justice. Kamala Harris said last night in her comments, a measure of justice is not equal justice.
Right.
And so I think that, it relates to the book Black Fatigue, because I think we're all going through just all sorts of emotions about it. On the one hand, yes, this happened. You saw the people crying and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then when you come down from that euphoria, it's like, oh, and we still have so much more work to do. And while that verdict was being read, a 15-year-old girl was killed last night in Columbus, Ohio, by police. She had called the police she called them for something. And I don't know all of the details yet. I haven't, heard a lot, but she called them because something was going on and she was killed. That was happening while the George Floyd verdict. And so it's mixed emotions. It's the, taking that moment of that sigh of relief for that moment, feeling that jubilation, feeling that, yes, we can get some, accountability in this country for wrongdoing. But it's short-lived, and that because that there's just so much more.
I woke up to that news this morning and I just, like I always do, like my shoulders just drop, and I'm just, how do you can't even process this. It's happening so often, so fast, on the heels of trying to, recover from one thing, another thing happens.
Exactly.
And I think what I've been feeling, I think you laid out so wonderfully in this book. You could see all of my stickies, and I've just got,
No, thank you. I'm so honored.
highlights and arrows and
I'm
underlines,
humbled.
because I had, I felt like it's like being sick. This is the analogy I'm going to use. It's like being sick, and you don't feel well, but you just you can't put your finger on it. It hasn't been diagnosed. You go to the doctors, your tests come back fine, but you don't feel well. I feel like that's what Black fatigue clarified for me. It
Oh,
was
thank
like,
you.
oh my goodness, like what I'm feeling at times, and this space that I'm moving in and out of and trying to navigate, it has a name. It's a thing.
It's a thing, right?
It's a real thing. And
Yeah.
so before we start diving into the specifics of Black fatigue, I'm just fascinated to know about your background. Like, did you know this was a space that you wanted to navigate, or did you, like many practitioners, wind up in this space and then really cultivate it and become the expert and do the deep dive to be able to be in the position that you're in today?
So I left the Eastman Kodak Company, 37 years ago, because I've been in my own business for 37 years. And when I was there in the mid 80s, I left in 1984. I was so unhappy. I would come home every night crying. I was the token back then. They put me in all of these visible spots to say, see, we have somebody Black. They sent me to an executive MBA program. I became a manager, early on in my career. However, the microaggressions, I didn't have a name for it back then, right? But the microaggressions, somebody said to me, I was wearing a short afro, similar to your natural style. And somebody came in my office and said, will your hair grow? And I looked at him and I said, yeah. He said, well, you ought to let it. And he walked out. He wasn't even a boss, but over and over again, just all sorts of things happening. I couldn't put my finger on. So my point is that I've been in this work a long time, not knowing. So because the first job they put me in when I started right out of college was affirmative action. So that was 1973. The Civil Rights Act had been passed in 1964. So many companies were just still trying to grapple with, well, what does all of this mean? And it was Rochester, New York, where they had riots in 1964, 65, timeframe. So they, again, I was the only one, the token, so put her in affirmative action. I was working with law partners, big law firms, helping to develop what they called position statements to show that Kodak was not discriminating. I was 23 years old. I didn't know anything, right? But they put me because I was the face. I could go out and say, see, But at the time, I didn't really understand how they were using me. So when I started my own business in 1984, I started a market research firm, qualitative and quantitative research, because that's the department I came out of from Kodak. I was doing, and I'd had my MBA, so mathematical modeling and all sorts of advanced statistical analyses and whatnot. And I said, I'm going to be a market researcher. Well, little did I know that it wasn't that easy to just say, hey, this is what I do. Hire me as a consulting firm. But then clients started to ask, can you segment the data by race, by gender? So people were then starting to recognize that they were going to have to be able to prove that they weren't discriminating, showing promotions. I said, sure, we can segment the data that way. And then they started asking, well, can you do diversity training? And I'm like, diversity training? No, what's that? And I said, no, I'm a researcher. I don't do that. And then but I am an entrepreneur. So by the third time I was asked, do you do diversity training? I said, let me just look into this. So that was probably late 80s or early 90s. And so that was my foray into it. Then walking down the streets of Harlem one day with a really dear friend, I was saying, you know what? I'm the usual suspect because, black woman doing diversity, of course, right? But Black woman doing market research, no, that doesn't fit. There's a dissonance there for people.
Right.
They would hire me to do diversity. And he said, well, did you ever think that was your calling? And I stopped right then and there. And I thought, wow, maybe God is leading me in this direction, saying that the world needs you doing this work. And so that changed my perspective. When I started to look at this work as my calling, my purpose, making a difference, then it all changed for me, as opposed to just looking at it from the perspective, I'm making a living. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business person. I need to make a living. I looked at it more from this is my contribution, can be my contribution.
Maybe that's why I'm drawn to you and drawn to your work, because that's my philosophy. I believe this work is a calling. I mean, we know through the reports that are coming out. I just saw another report, I think last week, about the $1 billion that is being spent by companies in this country on DE&I training. However, they still are experiencing some of the same issues. So it's like, how do you spend that kind of money? How do you make that kind of investment, but there's no return on the investment? And I believe it's because of the calling piece, right? And really being emotionally invested by your values, you know, and to do the right thing. A lot of times you hear people are talking in this space, they're going back and forth between the bottom line, right? The business case for this and doing the right thing. So I know that you do consulting work with a lot of firms. You're having a lot of meetings with CEOs and senior leaders, and you're very candid. You know, you're very candid in your books about your experiences and your thoughts. How do you have these conversations with people that are not people of color, especially when you're talking about race, and you're talking from a place of your real lived experiences? How do you have those conversations? Because I know people are struggling with the race conversation.
Yeah, we continue to struggle. And that's why that other book that I wrote, We Can't Talk About That at Work, how to talk about race, religion, politics. And I put all of those other things in, but I really was coming from a place of, we're not talking about race of all the diversity dimensions, right? Gender and LGBTQ and people with disabilities. Race was always the one that got shut down in the work that I was doing. When you started, we would get hired, my friend would get hired. Now, we don't want to talk too much about race because, we know that we have other diversity dimensions. So one time I did a session on generations, and after the session, they said that I talked too much about race. And I looked through my presentation. I didn't see anything in my presentation about race. It was me, because I was the one, standing there. So even throughout my career and building my company, I've been told, somebody called me one day. I didn't know who it was. And she said, "You don't know me." She said, "But I'm in the diversity space." And she said, "I've been at 3 different companies." And she said, "At all 3 companies, when we're looking at who to bring in as a consultant, your company, the Winters Group, comes up. And each time they say, yeah, the proposal is really great. However, our leaders are going to hear this better from a white person." So they would hire the white firm. She said, "I just need you to know that." She said, "I know that you're out there really trying to make a difference." This was like maybe 20 years ago. Maybe not 20, maybe 15 years ago. And I was like flabbergasted. Out of the blue, I get this call from somebody who says, "I just need you to know that I value your work. And the reason that you're not getting hired is because they want the white man to talk to the white man." So I come in now because so one of the things, a couple of things that I said, because when I left the Eastman Kodak Company in 1984, because they said, "Let her go, she'll be back. She's not going to be able to make it on her own, let her go." So my thing then was I would never go back crawling to any company because I couldn't make it. The Eastman Kodak Company has filed bankruptcy. I've never filed bankruptcy. I have been continuously 37 years. Now, I'm just not saying it's been easy. My husband died at age 47 when I was, so I started 84, 94. So like 13 years after I started my business, so I didn't have that other income, anymore. But I continued on. And now I'm at a place, 37 years in. The other thing that happened is we go to conferences all the time. We have booths and exhibits. So about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people would walk by our exhibit and say, "The Winters Group." "No, I've never heard of the Winters Group." These would be at diversity conference, right? So I said, that's not ever going to happen again. I'm going to make sure that people know who we are. And so as a Black woman entrepreneur, that's marketing, positioning, branding, all of those kinds of things. So today, I said this also, so today when the CEOs come to me today, and I'm saying to them, if you're coming to me, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm not going to, no holds barred, because we have not made progress. Chapter 3 in the book, Black Fatigue, Then is Now.
Yeah.
And so I don't even think I have this in the book. I have this in the presentations that I make around the book. In 1984, there was a headline, "Blacks jump off corporate ladder seeing the executive positions elusive or something like that. That's the year I started my own business. In 2019, there was another headline, very similar. Blacks not making it into the corporates, into the C-suite. 35 years later, you have the same story. So then is now. I have a daughter who has 4 degrees, engineering, computer science, master's in information systems, and an MBA. She works for me and has for 9 years because of her experience in the corporate world. So the next generation, right, has had the same experience. I wrote Black Fatigue because millennials were telling me when I was going into corporations, Black millennials were telling me, we're tired, we're exhausted. And I would tease with them and I say, you're 30 years old, how are you exhausted already? And they would look at me with that side eye like, we respect you, lady, but we're telling you we're exhausted. I'm saying intergenerational, exhaustion. So how, I turned 70 years old March 13th.
Okay, wait. I'm sorry. I'm expressive. That caught me off guard a little bit. Oh my goodness, you look amazing. You look amazing.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. So I, and I would always see the older ladies in my church and in different places, and just who were just in the media or whatnot, like people when Maya Angelou was alive and those, you get to a certain age where you just say, I've lived this long and I'm just going to have to tell my own story. And so with the CEOs, they listen, but many of them just still don't understand. They don't get it. I wrote a book a number of years ago called CEOs Who Get It, Diversity Leadership from the Heart and Soul. And that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, that because my whole premise in that book was it's not about the numbers. Right. It is about your values. Right. And it is about, and I wrote this, we have a blog that we do every week called The Inclusion Solution.
Yeah, I get that.
And I wrote a few weeks ago in that we started this diversity and inclusion work for compliance because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then we went to, it's the moral thing to do. We should do that, the right thing. And then we went to, but it's good for business. Aha. If we hire more women, statistics show in leadership that our bottom line will be better. If we hire more Black people, we can sell more stuff to Black people because we can ask them, like, what do Black people want, right? So it became this capitalistic kind of approach. I remember developing really thick business cases for organizations. So what's the business case? Tell me why I should do this, right? So now we are at the justice place of this work, right? And so we've transitioned now, and I wrote about this in Inclusion Solution blog. Morality and justice are 2 different things, right? The moral thing is sort of what I think inside. The justice thing is really about action. It's really about taking action, and Martin Luther King Jr. has a quote on that, the difference between morality and justice, and I can't quote it right this minute. But there's a distinction there. So you can have these beliefs. It's kind of like being a non-racist versus an anti-racist, which Ibram X. Kendi talks about. The non-racist just says, I'm not a racist. I love all people, but you're not doing anything about it. An anti-racist is saying you're actually taking action. You're actually speaking up. You're actually learning, doing your own learning, and you're actually trying to really understand what role do I play in dismantling this? And so I think with CEOs, I think that's where they have to get to. They have to move from, this is all about the bottom line and making sure Wall Street is happy, right? To moving to being a purpose-driven, like there's a kind of company called a B Corporation, a designation that a company can have, which says we're not only about profit, but we're also about purpose.
Yeah. You said so much there. There's so many nuggets there. One is, the idea of people not being comfortable talking about the very thing that is the problem. Like, how can we move forward? How can we have change when nobody wants to talk about race? And why is it that white people can be uncomfortable talking about race, but Black people have to be comfortable with racism?
Right. That's a nugget. Now you just said a nugget right there. That's a true nugget.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't understand that, because because we're talking about it doesn't mean that you're under attack. Like, I've heard people say, this happened lifetimes ago. Nobody's even living from that era. Why are we still talking about that? Because racism still exists.
Mhm. Right.
It
And
hasn't gone anywhere.
what's happening in organizations now. So George Floyd's murder, and we can now call it a murder, last year, everybody reawakened or finally, decided that, oh, racism is still a problem. We didn't know this. We're going to be anti-racist. We're going to focus on racism. But what we're finding already, and that is they're backpedaling. They say that they want to do anti-racism training.
Yeah.
When you bring in anti-racism training, people are uncomfortable. The white people are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is the CEOs are backing away and saying, well, how can we soften this? How can we make this more palatable, to white people? And what I'm saying about the discomfort thing is I'm saying that is not an excuse. There are a lot of things in life which make us uncomfortable. Going to the dentist makes you uncomfortable. There are a lot of things, that make you uncomfortable, but you do it and you work through it. Discomfort is not an excuse to continue to allow racism and systemic racism.
Yeah.
Discomfort, feel it, own it, move past it. We just heard from one of our clients that we're doing some work with the HR team. And somebody came back and said, well, I felt attacked by that because they felt attacked because we challenged that HR systems were equitable and that they needed to look at HR systems. So if you feel attacked, then you need to ask yourself, what about this is making me feel attacked? You need to own your emotions. Don't we tell our children that? It's not bad that you're, angry, but you need to own that behavior, right? You need to own that emotion and figure out what it is. Why are you uncomfortable? No. And so that's what I do. I turn it right back to them. Tell me more about your discomfort. Because what happens though, when we do too much of that, we start to center the white people again. It's about them.
Yes.
And not about trying to dismantle racism.
Yeah. I was invited to do an event to be a part of a panel, and it was a DEI panel discussion. And in the setup, the pre-meetings where they were prepping everybody, there was a lot of energy around being careful about discussing race or being careful about using language that might make people feel attacked or uncomfortable. And I said, well, you invited me to be a part of this panel, and I'm a Black woman. So I'm going to share my experiences. I can't take on that it's going to make somebody else feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like that.
Right. That's not your burden to carry.
Fatigue. Why am I taking that on?
That's not your burden to carry, right?
It's
that is
not my burden. You invited me because you want me as a professional, as a Black woman who has this experience to share that. But then you want me to share my truth, my experience in a way that is going to make somebody else feel uncomfortable.
Right,
I want to go, I could talk to you all day. So I want to jump into something because there's a graphic at the very first page of your book that I thought, like, I had to just sit with it and just like take it in. This idea of this tree, and you have the Black fatigue, the face there, and then the roots, systemic racism, but then the leaves and the branches, you call out racism in the workplace, health disparities, racial profiling, economic inequities, environmental racism. Like how did you get to the diagnosis of Black fatigue? Like you said, you were talking to millennials and they were saying that they were tired, but I have to imagine that in your research, there's some major light bulbs or things that were going off that got you to coin Black fatigue. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so one thing that got me to this idea of Black fatigue was actually Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility.
That's another one I have on my desk, yeah.
So when I read White Fragility, I said, white fragility leads to Black fatigue. I mean, that's a big contributor of Black fatigue because we're feeling that we have to explain, to white people. It's fatiguing to, over and over again, have to address the micro inequities that come or the tears that come from white people, white women, and, in particular, when these kinds of topics come up. It's fatiguing. It's fatiguing every single day to not know if somebody's going to ask you if they can touch your hair or that you should do something else with your hair. it's fatiguing. And so that's where I got the, this notion that it's deeper than just being tired. It's deeper than just being exhausted.
Yeah.
It's downright fatiguing. And I define fatigue in the book as the repeated,
Yeah.
because there are two definitions of fatigue when I looked up fatigue. And one of them had to do with metal, not mental, but metal, METAL. And it was saying the repeated variation, that fatigue. And I was saying, wow, that really is what it is. It's this repeated over and over and over again. And it's intergenerational. And so the scientists, the doctors and other kinds of scientists are now saying that there's something that gets into our cellular system as a result of the stress. So, let's just take yesterday, right? So a lot of, a lot of different kinds of, what am I trying to say? The adrenaline and all of those things that happen in your body when you are in an excited state, whether you're excited because you're happy, or whether you're excited because you're afraid.
Yeah.
All of that still, right? And when you have these things going on at the same time, I'm happy, but I'm also knowing that I'm still afraid that I could be targeted next. It's not over. That creates stuff in your system, like physiological stuff, which gets into our DNA and gets passed down from generation to generation. So the reason that middle-class, college-educated Black women have low birth rate babies, are more likely to have low birth rate babies and more likely themselves to die in childbirth, it's not because of our diet. It's not because, right, we're weaker. It's because of what's happened to our systems over this, this intergenerational period. So the scientists are saying racism, not race, is a contributing factor to the health outcomes. Some municipalities have declared racism a public health crisis.
Because racism is the behavior, right? It's the action, it's the behavior.
Right. Right. That we experience.
Yes.
Right? And it's impacting. And so what you said when we first started is that sometimes you feel sick and you go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, everything is okay. You don't feel right. And we've not been able to necessarily attribute it to racism, our daily lived experiences, because we're looking at this one-to-one, right? I go to the doctor, I get told something, you go to the doctor and you get told something, but you still. So what I wanted to do with Black fatigue is put all kind of in one place. And this is what people have been telling me about the book. It's like, oh, okay. Like you said, this is a thing.
Yes.
This is not, it's not just me, right? That this is a thing. So, and my publisher asked, who is the book for? Some of the on the editorial board at the publishing house. And I said, well, of course it's for white people, because Black people, we know we're fatigued. But I was wrong. The book
you wrote this book for me.
Well, and I'm hearing that from a lot of my brothers and sisters that in fact, yes, you can say yes. It's validating, it's affirming. And to be honest with you, the white media hasn't been as interested in the book as the black media. But I thought, yes, white people need to read this book, right? And so
then they'll understand. Then you will get it. You will understand. Oh, right. This is why the person reacted this way, or this is why I think she or he is angry.
Right. Yeah.
Be a high performer with Black fatigue. So, but I want to get to a couple other things before I have to let you go. I made a couple of notes. On page 7, you say, white people must address institutional and structural racism. Black people do not have the power to change white supremacist systems. And you made a quote by one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin. I've just been watching every video I can get my hands on. I think he was just the best person. I wish I could have met him in person. Another person who's very candid and open. But so my question to you is, in your work through your organization, how do you do that? like what's the formula? Like how do you get people to
Take responsibility.
to take responsibility?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, so here's what we're doing in our organization right now, the Winters Group, is we're sharing snippets of history in our sessions. So we go, we start with slavery and we go through, we don't, I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert there, but we talk about some, watershed moments, in history,
Mm-hmm.
and how that history is continuing and, and repeating itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at systemic racism, you have to be able to connect the dots. And that's why in the book, I try to talk about, environmental racism and, all of the different forms that it comes in, socioeconomics and all of the different forms that it comes in. But we have to look at it in its totality. And that's what I try to get people to do, because, okay, you've got a corporation. So you had 32 years, you had a great career in a corporation, right? Probably most of your bosses didn't know what your lived experience was outside of that corporation, right? And some of the things that as a Black woman that you were, experiencing. You probably, if you looked at that corporation, you probably would even find some disparities in promotions, right? You would find that, white men were more apt to be promoted than Black women, even though you were getting high performance ratings and you were working, probably twice as hard, right? And you probably knew, it was probably the unwritten rule that you couldn't do certain things that the white men could do, and get away with it, right? You just kind of knew that, right? We kind of know, you kind of like know your place, we used to say that years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we're trying to reveal. That's the revelation right now. Because when we went in to do listening sessions with Black people last year, a lot of corporations hired us to go in and do listening sessions with Black employees. They said that they felt muzzled. They said that they felt silenced. That, because if you're in Department A, and in Department A, let's say that there are 100 people, and there are 3 Black people in Department A, well, those 3 Black people don't really have agency. Those 3 Black people really don't have voice, right?
Right.
It really is the ability for organizations to look at the system, to look at it in its totality, and to amplify those voices and not minimize those voices, and not because you see, when we start to talk about justice and we name racism, because in corporations you couldn't even use the word racism until last year. You couldn't say racism, because if you said racism, the legal people would be all over you.
Oh, please. It's like helicopters start swarming across the roof and they send in the
right, exactly, right, because they learned that racism is a thing that can get you a lawsuit and bad publicity. So you don't say that word. Well, if we don't say the word, then we can't address the issue, as you said earlier.
Right.
So I think it is going to be those organizations that are willing to be uncloaked, if you will, take it all off, down to the skin, and be willing to say we're naked now, and we want to get reclothed again with justice. And it's not going to be a lot of organizations that are willing to do that, but we're seeing some who are tipping at it. They're getting there. We see organizations like the Ben and Jerry's of the world who talk very openly about racism. We're working with Cummins Engine, and it's no secret because it's out there. The CEO of Cummins came out with a very, very strong statement about anti-racism, that this is a racist world, racist society, and that Cummins was going to be about dismantling it. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, just came out today after George Floyd and said something to the effect that, it ain't over yet, type of thing. I'm obviously not. I'm obviously not quoting him, exactly. But his point is that just because we had this verdict doesn't mean that we need to stop. So you are seeing some CEOs of some very large companies who seem to be really beginning to understand what this what this is, that it's insidious, and that they're I use the term power brokers. I think I use that term in the book, don't I? Do I use that term in the book? We talk about allies, right? That we need allies, and so my point is that Black people alone they're not in the power, not enough of us are in those power positions to make
Right.
change.
Right.
So everybody's talking now about allies, right? Allies are fine. I talk about aspiring allies because you're not an ally yet.
Mhm.
There's a lot of work that you need to do. There's a lot of history that you need to understand. So it's kind of like when Maya Angelou said, somebody said to her, "Oh, I'm a Christian." And she said, "Oh, really already?" You know? So it's kind of like that. You're an ally really already? You know,
Right.
you're an aspiring ally. But allies oftentimes don't have the power
Yeah.
to affect change.
Yeah.
Power brokers do. I looked up power broker. I was thinking this word. And a power broker is an insider who has power to influence outcomes. So what we need are power brokers, and those are the big corporate CEOs, like what happened in Georgia with the law that they passed that perpetuates voter suppression. And the question was, where is the corporate world, right? The corporate world needs to show up and understand how. So somebody might say, well, why is a corporation involved in voter suppression? I think some people already said that. You ought to go back and and make Coke or whatever you do. But it is, I mean, that they have employees who are being suppressed. Right. Those employees have families who can't get to the polls, right? So when people say, well, we shouldn't talk about politics at work, it's all about politics. Yeah. Legislation is about politics. Yep. Y'all send people to lobbying to Washington, D.C., that's politics.
And you made it all about politics. So this is the script that you wrote.
This is the script that you wrote, right? And to say that we shouldn't talk about politics in the workplace, even let's think about it globally. All of these bills that in the Trump era, where people couldn't, if you lived in a Muslim country, you couldn't. Well, these big companies have employees who are from Muslim countries. Yeah. They go home and they couldn't get back into the country to come to work.
Yeah, that was just craziness, madness. Yeah,
and that's politics. And so I think, how do you do it? You really, you just keep pushing and you don't back away. And what we're doing as a company is we're firing clients. If the client is starting to backpedal and say, we don't want to do this, we don't want to do it, then we're saying, well, we're not the right company for you.
Wow, which is why you are still in business and and people are coming to you because when you stand by your values and do the right thing, you don't have to worry about your bottom line because things are going to work the way they're supposed to work. I want to, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, and I want to, especially, I'm concerned about our young people, that next generation that is coming in, and they're ambitious and they have their degrees and they're smarter and they're ready to roll up their sleeves and to get in there and to accomplish their goals and their dreams. But this is a space that has to be navigated. What can you share with us in terms of, we know that we don't have the burden and the responsibility to end racism, but we do know that Black fatigue is a real thing now. It's something that we're experiencing. How do we take care of ourselves as we continue to, navigate?
So one of the things about these younger generations, the millennials and the Zs, the Generation Zs, they are prioritizing well-being. So this is a transition, a transformation that, me being a baby boomer, I'm like, there's something called the NAP ministry. I don't know if you've heard about the NAP ministry.
No, but I'm probably already doing it because I take lots of naps these days.
Right. Yeah. I think I wrote about it in the book, one of the books anyway. And so the NAP ministry is this idea that rest is a part of the revolution. Rest is a part of what we're trying to do, and that we have to prioritize taking care of ourselves. I hear it over and over again from the young people who work for me. I've got a team of about 15 now, and many of them are are millennials and Gen Zs. But you see it on social media all the time. So that's the difference between our generation and that generation. When I first started to think about, when they're telling me, well, I'm exhausted, I was like, I never even thought about it that way. So I had the opportunity to get some feedback from Ambassador Andrew Young. I didn't speak with him directly, but somebody on my team knows him well. And she went to him and she said, when you were, with Dr. King during the civil rights era, did you talk about fatigue? He said, no, we didn't talk about fatigue. He said, we just had to keep going. He said, were we tired? Were we fatigued? Yes. He said, but we didn't name it. And I don't think, and he said something like, I would have a migraine headache, and Dr. King would say, just get on that plane. That headache will be gone when you get on the plane. And so I don't think that there was a priority around, it was still a needed, but it wasn't, and everybody was tired. We know that, who said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired? Fannie Lou Hamer, right? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. But I think that it's being framed differently today. Mm-hmm. It's being framed as this is a requisite, and I'm not going to feel guilty about rest. I have one of the people on my team, who's my vice president of learning and innovation, Brittany J. Harris. She just came out with a bunch of cards called Liberated Love Notes. And these liberated love notes are cards, and kind of almost, she's written them, to her, in essence, sometimes to herself. Mm-hmm. But she talks a lot about, the need for rest and not feeling guilty, about taking that rest, because rest has been associated with, for Black people, has been associated with being lazy.
Okay, can we say it?
Listen,
right? Real stereotype still very much alive and well today. If you're not working 5 jobs, 15 hours a day, you're lazy. Right. You're not successful. You don't want to be successful.
Right. And that, that exacerbates the health issues as well, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, right? Because we're just going. And I still have a twinge of guilt. So I've learned from my millennials and my younger team members. So I'll take Saturday, and I don't work on Saturdays. Because I've been for 37 years, I've worked 7 days a week. I've always taken my laptop on vacation, because I've always felt that if I don't, the business is going to fall apart. Yeah. And that just can't happen. Yeah. And I'm working on that. I'm working on myself. I'm working on myself to make rest and relaxation and the need for rejuvenation and, meditation and all of those things. I'm working on that myself, because I have been a driver. Somebody on my team, we did an internal survey, and they characterized me as a workaholic, and I expected everybody else to be too. And I'm like, no, I didn't think I expected everybody else to be, so yes, I'm working on that. And I think that's, for me, that is the big difference between this generation of civil rights activists and those in the 60s, that this generation is prioritizing and insisting on rest, insisting and shattering that stereotype that if you rest, you're lazy.
These are all tweetable moments right here. As Oprah would say, these are some tweetable moments. But you're saying for Black fatigue, what we have to do is give ourselves permission to rest and shatter the stereotypes and those beliefs that we've carried from generation to generation that Black people are lazy, because that stereotype is very real and very impactful. And I think it drives people in a way that they may not even realize. I have a hard time now, life after my corporate job, where for the first time, I'm not busy running from the airport, coming home, doing this, kids, this. And so I've had to really settle into this new space that I'm in and say, what are you running around crazy for? You can still work and still do the things that you want to do and still be engaged without you sacrificing rest. And rest means so much. It could be the napping, it could be the sitting still, it could be the walk, but rest is so important. That is a big nugget that I'm going to have to carry forward.
Well, Latinx brothers and sisters in Latin and South America, they take a siesta in the middle of the afternoon. Yeah. And I'm telling you that when you do that, and science has proven, if you take even a 45-minute break, you come back, rejuvenated. And then our Europeans take a month of holiday. Right. And they think that we Americans are nuts for not, prioritizing, because we would say, during my heyday of my business, people would be proud. I haven't taken a vacation in 5 years. And that was a badge of, honor.
Yeah, badge of honor. Meanwhile, they're looking at us like, they're looking at us like, that's why you people are sick all the time.
I'm sure you've heard somebody say that, right? And I haven't
Absolutely.
taken vacation in 5 years.
Absolutely. And the other thing I see, and I see it in social media a lot, is how people define success.
Mm,
And how they associate success, their language around success,
mhm,
their behavior around success. And I
mhm,
just sit back and I say, no, that's not it.
mhm,
If you are resting, if you are taking care of yourself, if you're making self-care a priority,
mhm.
regardless of what your tangible accomplishments are, you are on the success path. Right?
Mhm.
Because without your health is your wealth. Without your
Right.
health, all that other stuff doesn't mean anything. So I'm very
Right.
sensitive even to, especially
Mhm,
having platforms like this, the language around success and how success is defined, because I
mhm,
see a tone,
mhm,
do, run,
mhm.
be, if you want to be
Right.
successful. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I have one more question for you before we wrap up. This has been
Okay.
so good. This is exactly what I knew it would be, this conversation. But I ask all my guests this: what does living in the good space mean for you?
Living in the good space for me means it means being it means love. And this I want to just sort of unpack that, that agape kind of love,
Mm,
love that just manifests in the world.
mhm,
And so I try as best I can to surround myself with people who exude love, and I try to, express that back. So that, to me, living in the good space is not about material things at all. It's really about living in a place of love.
wow, that is perfect. And you demonstrated that to me. This was a gift that you gave me, and you don't even know me. This is a new podcast. I don't have 100,000 followers. I don't have 1,000 followers. I may only have 100. I don't even know. But you graciously accepted the invitation to come and have this conversation with me, and I want you to know that I appreciate that greatly. I view you as a role model. I have always had my hands in D&I work, but as they say, like kind of part-time. One of the benefits of my career was I was always connected to people, some of who you know, who did this full time and brought me to the table on projects or for corporate trainings that were going to be rolled out. And so when I left, I thought, I have the time to take a deeper dive now. And like I
Mhm.
said, my friend gifted me your books, and he was like, start here. Start with her. She's been in this space for a long time and she's doing some really great stuff. And I'm so happy that I was able to be connected to you, and more importantly to your work, because the work that you're doing is just great work. It's impactful. And I enjoy the newsletters, and I enjoy following you on LinkedIn. And I can tell you have a dynamic team because they're putting out some great stuff, great content.
Thank
So,
you.
so thank you again for your graciousness, your gift of time. And I say to you, best wishes as you continue on this journey. And know we're watching, know we're following, know we're listening.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Be
Thank you
well.
very much.